Today's webinar is a topic that is actually very important. And it's something that once you understand what I'm going to talk about today, can make a huge difference in how successful you become as an attorney and also happiness in your family, your how long you live, just a bunch of other things that I think that a lot of attorneys don't understand going into the profession. So this can make you obviously a lot more successful. It can make you happier and it can do like a tremendous amount for what happens over the course of your career. This is something that most people going into the legal profession don't understand. It's something that most people in the legal profession don't understand, but it's something that I've seen quite a bit have destroyed the lives of partners and associates and also enriched the lives of people that are going to learn about what I'm going to talk about today. This webinar is somewhat personal because I'm going to tell you about a lot of mistakes that I've made that have literally cost me tens of millions of dollars because of ego, and also the mistakes that a lot of attorneys that I know have made that in many cases have led them to die in their 30s and 40s of all sorts of things that wouldn't have happened had they not done what I'm going to talk about. And it's also going to tell you, unfortunately, what it takes to be successful in the legal profession and what I've seen in terms of working for some of the most successful partners and associates in the country over the course of my career. Really, what happens to a lot of the happiest and most successful attorneys is they're often actually very surprised when success comes. And what happens is the way to do the best in the profession is a lot of times stopping to prioritize what makes you look and feel, how things make you look and feel. And so most people, like their egos, are very much involved and they're concentrating on things that may not be the smartest thing to do. They're concentrating on prestige, they're concentrating on money. And when you eliminate yourself from that equation and you just do what feels right and makes others happy, you tend to do and have a much happier life. And a lot of people, most people out there, are basing their lives and their careers on what other people think of them. You drive nice cars, you try to live in the right neighborhoods, you try to work in the best firms you can, and then you feel either good about yourself or badly about yourself. But generally, when you're making other people's opinions more important than what makes you happy, you're not going to do or be happy. And so many people withdraw when they don't get the feedback they want, or they keep pushing more and more throughout the course of their careers and lives, which actually harms them. So this webinar, live webinar, at the end of this, I will take questions. I would recommend during this webinar writing down some of the things that I'm talking about and reflecting on yourself, because what I'm talking about today can be deeply therapeutic in terms of understanding the legal profession and how it's so unique compared to other professions and how your ego is so much more involved in other professions than it would be in any other type of job. Regardless of who you are, you're probably feeling like you need to do something different, like you need to get into a better firm, or you need to get out of something where you're in, or you need to get into an atmosphere where you're getting more approval. You're concerned about how what you're doing looks to other people. You may even be concerned about how your kids look to other people, or how your spouse looks to other people. And all these things, when you start thinking about them too much and looking for others' approval, it can really be to your detriment. One thing I'll just bring up real quickly, and this is not something to offend you. Typically, you have three classes of people. You have lower class people, you have middle class people, and then you have upper class people. And for the most part, the middle class is working for others. You're working for, as an attorney, you're working for companies and you're working for people inside of a law firm and or a company or wherever. And you have to, in order to survive, you have to be concerned about what those other people think about you. It's nothing different than when you're in school and you're concerned about grades. So you're always concerned about what other people think about you. And an attorney, because they're working for other people and they're working for courts and they're working for the approval of judges and everything, they're very concerned about other people and what they think about them. And they've also been concerned about what other people think of them all through school, and they're getting grades and the type of law school they go to and the type of grades they get in law school they get to. And then when they get into firms, whether or not partners like them. And then when they become partners, whether or not clients like them. And so you're always in this position. And it's a very unique position to the legal profession. And it can be demoralizing because you're always concerned about what other people think of you. And just think about where you are right now. You may want to get into a better firm. You may be unemployed. And when you're unemployed, that's what people think of you many times. So everyone is in this position where they're so concerned about what other people think of them, and they're concerned about what their classmates think of them. And they're all when they get out of law school, they're concerned about all these things. And it's can be very hurtful. And it can really change how your whole concern about these things can change your psychology and your nervous system and your happiness and all this sort of thing. So when I was between the ages of 7 and 11, I had some just horrible things happen in my life. My stepsister, who I was very close, was when she was 16, she was working in a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Detroit, but not in really even a bad part of Detroit. And someone walked in to the fast food restaurant and was robbing it and shot her in the head, and she died. And after that, it was tremendously stressful for my stepfather, my everyone, and he, I think, partially because of that, he within a few years got this very serious cancer, which I think probably stressed out his nervous system completely. He started drinking too much. He started having all these problems with owing people money. And then he became sick for a couple of years and he was dying from cancer. My mother, while this was going on, and then also shortly thereafter, was obviously very disturbed. She was a single mother all of a sudden. She was under just a tremendous amount of stress. And then, so in order for her to cope, which a lot of people do, and that's one way to get out of these things, or at least temporarily, she started drinking way too much. And so I was in this position where or basically I was living with an alcoholic mom, and all this tragedy had happened in my life. So I had to step up and be the man in the family, which obviously when you're very young is not easy. And so to look normal, to be normal, I decided to excel in elementary school. And when I was at home, I was taking care of my mom and my sister and trying to manage her drinking, and all these things were happening. So in order to look normal and feel normal, I started just excelling in school as much as I could. When I was like 11 years old, I wrote like a 300-page report about Russia, and it was written by hand, and I'd taken pictures and things and put it in the report. But I just went all out doing everything that I could. I did the same thing with sports. I tried the absolute hardest I could. I wanted to look like a good student to other people. I wanted to look like a good athlete because I became very concerned about how I looked to outsiders and people in the area that I was in. And I became very concerned about projecting some sort of normality in a life that was otherwise very tragic and not doing well. I even got paper routes by the time I was like 10, even though you had to be like 11, and did 2 paper routes and just made money I could and all these sorts of things because I was trying to look good and successful to the outside world, which is very crazy when you're at that age. And I wasn't getting any encouragement from others. I was just doing all of this on my own. And when all this stuff happened, I was not right on the inside. I was actually probably very depressed and troubled. And I was in a school and they knew what was happening with me. And so they asked the social worker in the school to start speaking with me about all these various issues. And he would appear at the doorway during art class, which was easy to miss, and take me down this dark staircase to like this small room. And he would take out board games like Chutes and Ladders and then ask me what was going on at home and how I felt. And this is something that the school should have done, and it was the right thing to do. But even when he was questioning me at a young age, I felt like I had to project all this normalcy and that I had to protect my mom, I had to protect myself. And so I didn't really ever say anything to him and covered up everything that was inside. So I would not tell him what my problems were. I would basically say everything was amazing. And when that started happening, my father started trying to get me to live with him. My parents were divorced when all this started. And he told me very early on that his objective was to get me to move in with him and would ask me how things were going in my house and told me that he'd go to court and get custody of me if things weren't going well in that particular home. So even with the closest person to me in the world, my father at the time, I also projected normalcy and tried to act like everything was normal. I had a half sister. My mom was an alcoholic. I didn't want her to have to live with her. I had to protect her. And I felt if I did all these things differently and somehow was a good student and all these sorts of things that codependent people develop, then I could help my mother. And I developed that type of characteristic. I also felt if I moved in with my father, I would lose that relationship. And so I always told the social worker that everything was great in my life and never shared any information with him. And again, did the same thing with my father. I asked to protect like everything was great. And I kept everything inside and channeled my energy into doing well in school, sports, overachieving, and all these things while feeling negative on the inside. And I was very afraid to look vulnerable. I wanted to be the man of the house. I would fix things when they went wrong. I would do landscaping like gardening, mow the lawn, and wanted to make sure that everything looked normal. And I missed out on a lot of childhood because of that. It was difficult for me to maintain friendships because I didn't want people going over to my house and seeing like the mess my mother had made the night before. She would cook dinner sometimes and pots and pans, and she would never do the dishes. So I would do that. And I missed out, of course, on a lot of rewards that my childhood might otherwise have offered. One of the things, too, that's just important to note is when you grow up in any type of atmosphere, you will develop certain types of characteristics. And that particular characteristic and something that I carried with me throughout my life is being like codependent, feeling like for love, you need to take care of others and you need to help them with the things that they want. And that's the way of being loved. And just to give you a little aside, that was something that I carried with me and still do in relationships with women and other people. Sometimes I'll feel like I need to take care of people. And if I just do more, they'll love me more and all these sorts of things. So when you develop an early experience like that, it can literally affect you the rest of your life. By the time I got into seventh grade, all this stuff started catching up with me. I got very depressed and withdrawn, despite the fact that I was capable of doing these things. I didn't get good grades, and I tried to be the best at anything and everything, excuse me, the best at school I'm not, became tired of it. So I stopped doing athletics. I was depressed. I stopped getting good grades and became not a very good student. My dad's mother and parent and my grandparents are wealthy. So when I got into eighth grade, I was sent to a private school in Grosse Pointe, University of Liggett, which was a very formal school and with a lot of people that were wealthy from the auto industry and so forth. And I started acting out because that was the only way that I knew to relate. So I did stupid things and got into trouble and got kicked out for that. And the same thing happened. I moved in with my dad in ninth grade, still shell shocked from all this, bad student, unable to apply myself, athletics, elastics, and everything fell by the wayside. I just was in a very bad state, which you can imagine after all of this. But what happened when I was 15, my father was transferred to Bangkok, Thailand. I got into a new environment when that happened. And it was just a very good school because all these teachers from around the world wanted to work there. So they had the best teachers. The students were Chinese and Taiwanese and things and very motivated. And I ended up just changing everything when I got there. I was in a stable environment. I wasn't around my mom. And suddenly I started doing exceptionally well in school and stuff. The previous environment that I was in, which is interesting, the people that I had been friends with in middle school and when I was in ninth grade were not like the best kids because those kids were having issues and I didn't feel like they would look too closely at my life. They were by that time drinking and so forth. And literally more than half of those kids, which is like 10, are when ultimately things like happened, like they went to prison or debt are a debt, which is scary. Another one of my wealthy friends' fathers bought him a liquor store when he flunked out of college, and after a year of that, he was the liquor store closed down because he'd sell liquor to underage kids, and just there's just a lot of bad stories about people that I was with in that environment, and my ability to change came from being in a different environment. So just think about your situation, like where are you right now? Are you in a bad relationship? Or are you in a bad situation with your career? Where are you? And what would happen if you changed your environment? Because changing your environment can mean everything, and changing the people that you're around can mean everything when you're in a situation where you're with the right people and so forth, or even in the right firm or in the right practice setting. So vulnerability is something that is one of the greatest liabilities in your career. And I believed at a very early age that I could control my environment by doing very well. And I believe that I could control people, I could control my career, I could control school by bending my will to the world and trying to be in control of the world and trying to be in control of everything that happened. And when you believe you control, that you try to control the world, this all sorts of things happen that end up being very damaging, because when you're trying to control the world, you're often just on your own. People are not necessarily trying to help you. You may manipulate people, but ultimately you need other people to survive. And people will only like you and help you most of the part unless they feel good about you. And then people typically will feel good about you to the extent you're vulnerable. Think about the people that you like. You may like certain actors and actresses and see them vulnerable in movies. You may like certain people around you that are vulnerable and feel good about them. And maybe they're people probably that aren't outside of practicing law. People love young children because they're vulnerable. People love people where they can see their vulnerability. It helps them identify with people. One of the biggest tricks, I took classes in screenwriting at one time. And anytime you watch some sort of movie, action movie, or where there's a lead character and the person goes out and fights, typically why you will connect with them is because they show some sort of vulnerability. And at the beginning of movies, it's just very common, or shows, you'll see the hero like pick up a cat and start petting it. It'll be its best cat, or they'll have some sort of vulnerability in relationships. But the script writers will always write something in to the script to show that character is very vulnerable. And then that vulnerability, they'll be up against some sort of awful circumstances and will overcome it initially, but they were vulnerable. So the point I'm trying to make is ultimately you can't do anything without other people. And everybody needs other people to survive. And the way typically you will be happy and succeed is when other people like you. And things happen typically, you do well when other people are helping you. And when I've not succeeded in all sorts of different things, it's when I typically haven't relied on others. And if you don't rely on others, then people definitely don't like you. So think about the people that you may not like, that aren't interested in opinions and will not show you their vulnerable side, and are very just not, there's nothing for you to identify with them. These are people that aren't liked. And so you may be wondering what any of this has to do with your career. And this is the point, and I want to make sure you understand this. The most successful attorneys are not vulnerable. What they do is they bend their will typically by not being vulnerable. They don't share their feelings with other attorneys. To the extent you do this, a lot of times, you're not going to be successful. You're going to fail if you're vulnerable. And this is an awful thing, because if you can't be vulnerable, then you're isolated from other people. People even do this, attorneys do it in their relationships with their spouses. They do it all over, and it's part of the profession. And the reason is that there's a deep-seated thing in the legal profession. And it happens, I think a lot of it has to do with the history of what it is to be a lawyer. But a lawyer is an advocate. And what an advocate does is, an advocate, no matter what you're doing, if you're doing a legal agreement or something, or you're a corporate attorney, or you're doing litigation, You never want to show your clients vulnerability. You don't talk about it, or you de-emphasize it, and then you try to make your client appear strong or not guilty or whatever it is. And or you do the same thing if you're a prosecutor. And so that is something that attorneys are expected to do with clients, but also the attorneys that respect other attorneys as much, and attorneys that get jobs, and attorneys that succeed, have to hide their vulnerability. Meaning, just like I did when I was very unhappy and not showing my vulnerability and how it screwed me up and how it created all these problems throughout the rest of my life. If you become vulnerable as an attorney in your job search and in your career, then you're not going to be viewed favorably by other attorneys. Think about it. If you're in a large firm, you cannot show vulnerability. If you show vulnerability to partners, and if you show it to other associates, or you're a partner and you show vulnerability, you're going to have problems. So a short time after I got into what I'm doing now, which was 25 years ago, I realized very quickly how difficult it is for attorneys to be vulnerable and for them to share their weaknesses and what happens when they do. And here are some examples of weaknesses that make you vulnerable. If someone is unemployed, they have a challenging time getting another job, often an extremely difficult time if you're in a major market, or at least at a peer firm, if they look vulnerable. And because that projects weaknesses and vulnerability. If somebody has lost a job or had issues just with their last employer, regardless of what they were, other firms will avoid hiring them. That's a form of vulnerability. If an attorney wants to go into some sort of situation where there's less work or less challenges from where they are, they verbalize that to employers. That also looks weak, and that's a form of vulnerability that hurts you. If you had personal issues in the past, health concerns, substance abuse, DUIs, like stupid things like that, it can be very challenging for you to get a position. I had a case once where our candidate quite recently, who was a partner moving between firms, and something came up that he sued an employer 15, 20 years ago for something that he had a right to sue for. And it wasn't, he was basically fired for not violating the law. And even that was followed him, like people did. That's a form of vulnerability. If an attorney often, and this is horrible to say, but if you get like some sort of disease or you have some sort of health problem that makes you leave the practice of law for some time, that can prevent you from getting hired. Because I'm not pointing out any firms in particular, but this has happened a lot. Firms are like, why would we hire someone if there's a risk of them getting sick again? It's crazy. If you have substance abuse problems or have had them in the past and you talk to people about that, that looks vulnerable. All sorts of things that you could do that could have happened to you in the past that are mistakes will make you look vulnerable, and it could become challenging for you to get a position. So you have to hide your vulnerability as an attorney, whereas in other professions, you might not have to, but you have to in order to succeed. And you may not even realize this, but what I'm telling you is looking vulnerable in any type of way for anything that is less than putting forward your best face can make you vulnerable. Now, it's not to say that's for every firm, but it's for a lot of firms. And I would say more than 75% of potential jobs out there, if you look vulnerable for any of these reasons, it can hurt you. If you have personal issues that people become aware of, be very advised, and I'm not trying to scare you, but it's true. If you talk about things to one person in your firm, I don't care if it's a secretary, I don't care if it's another associate, I don't care if it's a partner. If you have things that make you don't look as professional and perfect as possible, and there may be some questions about your vulnerability, that can hurt you. And I'm sorry, if you bring up someone that you've had a drug problem in the past and they learn about that, and maybe it was 15 years ago, that can hurt you. And so the ones that get jobs and the people that do the best in the job market don't look vulnerable. Their weaknesses are covered up. If they are looking for a new job, it's a better way to look for a job is to say, well, there wasn't enough work, or I'm trying to move to a better firm because I'm not getting the type of work I want. I want more challenge. Not I'm unhappy just because I don't get whatever. But you can't look vulnerable. And best people that get jobs in the market, this is just in the DNA of the legal profession, aren't as that vulnerable. And the more they look vulnerable, the less likely they are to get hired. I do all sorts of things on resumes and things to remove any sign of vulnerability from a resume, to make people look like that there's nothing wrong with them, that they've had a perfect career, that they haven't been part of organizations that could make them look vulnerable, that all these sorts of things to take off grade point averages that aren't high, to minimize, to make sure that no mistakes are on there in terms of how they're portraying themselves. And this is what you need to do with your resume. Think about your resume. Does that show any vulnerability? Does that show something that can make you look vulnerable? Because if it does, that's going to create questions. And attorneys are trained to zero in on weaknesses and vulnerabilities. That's what they do. That's what litigators do. That's what the best transactionals do. They zero in on others' vulnerabilities. And so that mindset carries over into getting hired. That mindset carries over into your success as an attorney. Most attorneys, in my opinion, miss out on the best opportunities. What happens to a lot of people, and this is especially true with law firm partners, they often don't get the best jobs they could because they want to control everything. These are the most successful law firm partners, but even ones that aren't successful, that have been successful, try to control everything. They control legal recruiters. They control the whole situation. And a lot of recruiters do not like working with partners because partners in a lot of law firms will not be able to take advice from recruiters. They won't take feedback and they won't often assist. So they don't get to take assistance. They don't get the results they otherwise could have because they don't want to look vulnerable. And what does that mean? That means that they try to control the entire recruitment process. They don't allow others to advise them. They are used to being in power and dictating terms. If there's 300 law firms in a city that could potentially apply to and get a position in, those law firms, they may whittle that down to two because they don't want to be rejected. They think it will hurt their ego. And they take people that are around them as tools to make things happen without exposing any type of vulnerability. And the more successful you get many times, the less vulnerable these attorneys will be. And that's good for their clients. That's good for their advancement in law firms. And just think about this particular personality trait. The higher up you go in the legal profession, I'm just going to be completely clear with you, the less vulnerable the attorneys are. And I would know, when I work with firm partners many times, they already know the places they want to apply, and they're not often interested in my suggestions. Now, I'll give those suggestions, but often they're not interested. And when they get interviews, they often go into the interviews and they don't share any feedback with me. And they often will just, once they go into an interview, a recruiter's job typically is to talk to the firm and then arrange more meetings, they'll do it themselves. Then they don't want help negotiating their salary and feedback from the firm. And they try to take control of the entire situation. And so a recruiter may do the introduction, but a lot of times, I would say more than 40% of the time, and the more successful the partner is, the more likely this is to occur, they will take control of the entire situation. They do not want to hear any form of job search advice often, and they do not want to hear a lot of stuff about how they should do things because they want to control the situation. Sometimes, not always, but a good portion of the time, at least 20%, they're vague in terms of the reasons for moving. Now, they will say I'm getting fired or losing my job and so forth, but often not. And it becomes very difficult many times to work with these people because they're missing out on opportunities that they might otherwise have. And the firms, when they approach them, they already often know that those firms may be interested in them. And because they try to control everything, they typically are missing out on opportunities that they otherwise would get. They're not taking feedback they're not interested in feedback often. And they're likely often to come up with negative, they likely to repeat and get themselves in the same negative situations without knowing why. And it's the same when you start working with associates and that are successful in their job search as well as partners. These people tend to want feedback. These people also will look at a lot of opportunities, and these people are open to learning. One of the most astonishing things that I see at BCG, and I talk about this in all of my webinars to some extent, is typically if you think you can apply to 5 jobs or 10 jobs, your odds of getting something, unless you have the most outstanding qualifications imaginable, are often not that good because when you apply to a firm, there may be, especially large firms, there may be 50 plus applicants, and the firm is going to select the best person. And they will look at all sorts of different things, the firm you're at, your whatever. And it's not easy to get interviews. And so people will take that and they will believe that there's some sort of failure, that they look negative to the firms that they've applied to, that the recruiter's doing something wrong, all these different things. And they won't do like a full job search. When I work with candidates, and it doesn't matter if the person is in a law firm and in a practice area that is like a solid practice area, like they're doing one practice area. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be medical malpractice defense. It could be corporate M&A or capital markets. But when they allow themselves to be marketed to a high number of firms and they don't worry about getting rejected or not looked at or interviewed, they almost always get jobs. It's very rare that someone doesn't. I mean, they may sometimes look at other markets. Like I'm working patent attorney right now in New Mexico. There's only 3 law firms or 5 law firms there that really have patent practices. I'm making him look at things in a bunch of different states and he will probably get something, but he has to open himself to be vulnerable and reject it. And people that are allow themselves to be vulnerable, especially in job searches, and they tell me what's wrong and that I can cover that up for them, they're going to be much more successful. And the people that apply to a lot of firms and don't worry about getting rejected are going to be successful. There's so many firms out there that anybody that wants to can get multiple law firm jobs, but most people don't. That doesn't happen because they're not vulnerable in their job searches. And this is one of the things that holds so many people back. I can guarantee you that regardless of who you are, that your ability to be vulnerable and get rejected as many places as possible is hurting you. So I had a partner I was working with not too long ago. He was very successful and he was looking for a position. And there's so many firms he could have gone to. He had a good book of business. He was at a major firm and was attractive. However, he's someone, again, that needed to control the situation. He was very discriminating. He eliminated too many firms. So he only looked at a few. He wasn't listening to advice. He was very clear. He was not clear about what he wanted in the search. Was not vulnerable. He had lost his job and had a limited amount of time to find one. He wouldn't share his compensation for the firms that he applied to because he thought that would make him look vulnerable. And when he went out on interviews, even though there were all these things he was doing wrong, all these things, ways he approached firms, he didn't want any advice. And he ended up, even though he was a commercial litigator, going to a firm that does primarily insurance. And he's not even an insurance attorney. Actually, he was a corporate attorney from a 1,000-person law firm. But then the firm didn't even have a corporate practice. They were going to have him try to start one. It didn't work out. But that's what happened because he didn't allow himself to be vulnerable and control the situation. He didn't allow other people to advise him. And if he had, he would have been at a good firm that did corporate work. Maybe not the same caliber that he was at, but he would have been much more successful. And so when you try to control everything and bend your will to it, it can create so many issues for you because often if you're not afraid to be vulnerable, especially like in a job search or in relationships with others, it can harm you quite a bit. So personally, because of the way I grew up, because of what I believed I needed to do to be successful, because I'm an attorney, I've been trying to been trying to bend my will, to others for the majority of my life from the time I was young. And trying to bend my will to other things has made me successful to some extent, but it's also provided untold misery when I was young, trying to control my home situation. And then when I got older, doing the same thing with my life and career. And I have been doing that to some extent, not as much now, but my entire life. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things and mistakes that I made, which are very serious with my ego, and some lessons that may be resonating with you and things that you've done with your ego, trying to be a good attorney and not bend your will to things and not be vulnerable. So about 15 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, I was driving through Malibu and I saw this open house and I liked the house. It was a beautiful house. It had its own cove on the water. And my wife looked at it and with me and said it was her dream house and that if I could pull this off, I would be like a superstar in her eyes. And so I decided to be a superstar and that I would have this house. The problem is the house was a $15 million house and it needed a lot of work. And honestly, I couldn't afford it. And I've done this thing. I decided though that I would get it. And I've done that successfully throughout my career as an attorney, then at that point in this business. And I've done this with all sorts of things. For example, I bought about 5 or 6 years after getting in this business, if you can believe it, I bought a building right across the street from another building that I owned a floor on and decided I would own this building and put my name on it, call it the Harrison Barnes building as I was expanding my empire. And I didn't, when I bought the thing, I never asked what it was worth. I just talked to a real estate agent. He gave me a price. I didn't know anything about how buildings are valued. I just decided that I wanted this building because I wanted to put employees in there and I wanted to have my name on a building so everybody could drive by and see my name. I bought the building, the floor that I was in across the street without negotiating the price. I just decided that I was going to have these beautiful offices without having any idea what things were worth, just because I figured I should have it. And that was my ego telling me that I needed something like that to look successful. And this home was $15 million that wasn't worth that much, but my wife said I would be a superstar if I got it. So I decided that I was going to have that too. And my will and this ego of mine and the ability to mold things to my liking was something that I've been doing for my entire since I've been like 17. I'd started businesses that were successful when I was by that time. I bought buildings. I had hired the people I wanted by making bad deals and things with them. I had done the same thing with getting people jobs. I had made sure I got them jobs by bending my will and doing everything I could. And I did, whatever I wanted, I pretty much tried to make those things become true. So when I went into the legal profession, I did the same thing. I achieved everything I wanted by getting the best firms and everything with my will, learning how to interview and not telegraph weaknesses. And even though very quickly, when I got into law school, I realized that there were a lot of aspects that I didn't enjoy. And achieving things, getting material things, and getting everything I wanted was exactly what I did. And I remember there were two things that happened. One time before I moved into this $15 million house in Malibu, I bought what I figured was the best and largest house in Pasadena, California. And it was this huge 14,000 square foot house that was decked out and had murals on the ceilings and was just really over the top. And I bought that house. And I remember when I got there, when I moved in the first day, I was sitting on a lawn chair by the pool, which just happened to be the largest pool in Pasadena. And I was sitting there by the pool, and suddenly I became very depressed. And I think that a part of me thought that I needed to have this to look and be successful in other people's eyes. And I've been doing that forever, but I realized it didn't lead anywhere. And then I got to this house, and I was still feeling like I needed to achieve more. And I bought a Rolls Royce Phantom and was driving this around Pasadena, which is just ridiculous. Who drives a car like that when they're in their early 30s to feel important? But I did that. And my life was just absolutely ridiculous. And what I did is I was able to force my will on people and situations. And my life had shown up until that point. And I realized I could force my will onto situations and get things, but it was never satisfying. The cars weren't satisfying. The house wasn't satisfying. It absolutely did nothing for me. Now, how do you do those things? If you're questioning, like, how did a person do that? You can do these things if you want. You are capable of doing these things. Anybody's capable of doing this. What did I do? I bought books and studied them, Think and Grow Rich. I listened to Anthony Robbins tapes. I did all these things to show me that I could achieve anything that I wanted, and it actually worked. And had I not done these things, I probably wouldn't have or exposed myself to all this self-improvement stuff. I probably never would have reached these heights of success at such a young age, because I learned that whatever I wanted, I could achieve. And it's true for the same thing for you. If you want to achieve things, you can do it, but you're going to have to force your will into situations, and you're going to have to be ruthless doing it. And it's not necessarily going to lead to happiness. And so this self-improvement and all this stuff taught me to set goals. It taught me to be vicious and be a very hard boss and hard charging. And it enabled me to impress what I wanted on the world by pushing forward and getting these things done. And again, anyone can do this, but I'm not saying it's satisfying them least. So anybody can get what they want. If you have enough motivation, you have enough desire, you learn from your mistakes, you set goals, you can do this. And most people that are successful, what they do is they are able to, at that level, are able to fire themselves up and desire more than the next person and have bigger goals. And when you have goals, you will move towards them. An airplane takes off, and when you're flying an airplane, which I also started doing, which is just absolutely insane. First, I got helicopters. I learned to fly those because I thought that would be really cool, flying to places and landing there. But then I started flying planes. When you fly a plane, essentially what you do is you get in the plane, and if you're flying without GPS, which I was doing at the time, you have to make all these course corrections. You're looking at maps, you're listening to beacons and flying towards them. And so you may make thousands of little course corrections on the way, but you have to always change. But if you have a goal, you'll always move towards that goal. And you can do that. You can do that with your job. You can do that with your career. And frankly, I recommend it. But what does that do for you? You have to think about that. But if you want to have a really strong career, you can set a goal for yourself to be a partner, make $5 million a year by the time you're 35, and keep reviewing that goal every year and move towards it slowly and make decisions to do it. And you can do it. Anybody can. But the problem purchasing this home was that it was ridiculously irresponsible. I didn't get an appraisal, and I could afford it at the time, but I had no idea, because I pushed my will on this house and it wasn't worth what I paid for it, that there would be this huge recession in like 2008, and it would just create havoc. My business, the placement business, went down dramatically, and I had all these people to support, my property to support, my businesses to support, hundreds of employees to support. And up until that time, I've been able to force my will and all that and make good things happen. And I never balanced my other obligations for this house. I just would spend money, was spending money on this and huge like payments every year that were going towards the principal because I had a 5-year mortgage, and I didn't think anything through. And I just bent my will and all my personal desires to what I wanted and not what was feasible and made sense. So think about this: buying buildings for $8 million, buying houses for $15 million, like doing all these things that made no sense and weren't well thought out because I was trying to be impressive to myself and I wanted to look successful to others. And I felt that I deserved all these things and needed to achieve at this level. And I surrounded myself with people that would do what I wanted. If a person working for me, like a financial person, told me no, I would get very angry and I would want to fire them. I didn't want to have limits placed on me. So I went through a succession of accountants and bookkeepers and only would hire people and keep me people around that would tell me what I wanted to hear. I didn't want to hear that I wasn't capable. I didn't want to hear that I was making bad financial decisions. I just believed that I would bend my will to all these things. And if I did that, I would get whatever I wanted. It was all about me. It was all about my ego. And anybody that stood in the way was mowed down. And the home was incredibly irresponsible. It wasn't something that I should have. The only thing that like pushed me forward to do this was one of the main things was my wife decided and told me that I would be amazing and a superstar to her. So that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted someone to tell me that doing this would make me amazing and a superstar. And so in order to chase that and to feel like a big deal, I decided to buy this house. And because of this ego, I purchased it. It was far from my office. It wasn't good for my business. I couldn't go in all the time. I left where I was living and sold this other house and moved into something I could afford. And as I wasn't working on my business and around people more and more, over time, I wasn't making as much money. And then the financial crisis hit. And so this decision cost me $8 million. But even before that, it was causing all this worry. Every day I spent a year trying to get a good mortgage on it. I couldn't because of the financial crisis and my income going down. I realized that I'd wasted a lot of effort. I met people that I shouldn't have been involved with trying to help me get a mortgage that came along and took advantage of me. It created an incredible strain in my marriage. And it was just a horrible decision and something I regret every day. And I was trying to do more than I should have. And I should have not done that because my ego was making me do all this because I wanted to look successful in my eyes, my wife's eyes, and other people's eyes. And I was trying to bend my will into proving something to myself and the world. And doing this because I was controlled by my ego. I wanted to feel like I was important. And I wasn't allowing myself to be around people that could have guided me and given me the right platform to make good decisions. I didn't want to take others' advice, just like the most successful partners don't want to take advice. And my mistakes were very selfish and they were ego driven. They weren't smart. And this ended up just being devastating. So I put myself, because of my ego, into situations I shouldn't have been in and hurt me very much. It hurt me with a building that was worth less money than I bought and I had to sell. It hurt me with all these things because I was being selfish and not smart. So here's a warning that I got before starting my business and how ignoring it cost me millions of dollars. So it's a fun story. But one day I was walking down the street, and actually I was actually working in my business at that time, but I was walking down the street and I was going to work and I was leaving a parking garage, and this man in a turban came up to me and he said, he walked past me and then he stopped and said, good luck, you have good luck. And then he said he had a message from God for me. And I said, how do you know that? How can you prove that to me? And he said, I want you to guess the number between 1 and 10 and also name a flower. And he turned around and wrote something on a piece of paper and then put it in my hand where I couldn't see it all folded up. And then he said, tell me the number and tell me the flower, because I know I'm being told by God to do this. And so I looked at the piece of paper, didn't look at the piece of paper, I'm sorry. And I told them the flower was violet and the number was 6. And then I opened the paper and that was exactly what was there. And I was in shock. I couldn't believe that something like this could happen. I thought that this must be some message from a higher power or something. And then he started telling me all this personal stuff about myself, which I was also astonished. He said, you're only comfortable being with one woman at a time, which is true. And he said, your parents were divorced and you tried to grow up doing everything on your own. And I didn't know at the time, he was basically taking risk. Like most people are interested in only one woman at a time. And a significant percentage of people, over 50% of the population, gets divorced. So a lot of people are growing up in divorced families. And he said a few other things, and my mind was just completely blown. And what he said to me, which I'll never forget, is he said, never get any partners. Like, you're a business person, but never get any partners. And he said, if you get any partners ever, you will end up on the street. And so I was standing there and absolutely astonished by what he'd said. And then he said that I needed to support his mission to God. And I handed him all the money that was in my wallet, which is about $60. And I asked him if I would see him again. And he said that God would send him or someone like him back into my life if I ever need one of these vital lessons. And so I walked away just absolutely astonished and absolutely amazed at what had happened. And what he was doing is he was employing common tricks, much like a fortune teller. People are more unlikely to pick 5 because it's too obvious. So they pick something else. And I guess 6 is the most likely number. You're unlikely to pick a rose because it's too obvious. So you choose the violet or something like that. But this trick, combined with his insights into my life and character, left me believing that he must have some sort of special knowledge. And this really was from God. And it carried a lot of weight. I took that advice seriously as it pertained to getting partners, which was right up my alley because this is someone that's motivated by ego. So early in my career, I had lots of people, recruiters that worked for me that wanted to be my partner. I had outside placement firms that wanted me to combine with them, including a man that had one time owned the largest placement legal recruiting firm in California. And each of these people was talented, but I didn't believe they were as talented as me. I wanted to control everything. And so I didn't think these people would work as hard as I did, be invested as I was, growing the business or think in the long term. So I ignored these people and refused to become partners with them. But this advice from this man was very good at the time. It saved me a lot of problems. Two of the people that wanted to be partners were terrible characters, and I ended up getting in long, drawn out lawsuits with them when I refused to be their partners. And they went on and did this with a lot of other people. And had I made that mistake and gotten into bed with these people, it would have definitely hurt my career a great deal. And but it also hurt me a great deal. Years ago, a private equity company came to me and wanted to be my partner and give me a bunch of money, as well as half of the business they bought for $65 million in exchange for half of the companies I owned. And I toyed with this for a while and ended up giving control, up afraid of giving control. It would have been one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, but I made a huge mistake. And it was a mistake because could have surrounded myself and taken advice from people that had a much better understanding of business. I could have learned a lot from them, and my career in life would have improved probably dramatically. And I would probably have gone on to start other businesses that I could have sold for hundreds of millions of dollars, which a lot of very successful people do. They take money from private equity companies and then they grow and they do well with their advisors and their professional teams. They could have significantly increased the size of the business, but I didn't want to give up that control. I didn't want to have people advising me. And so this lack of refusing to talk to these people ended up hurting me dramatically. And all these decisions based on ego, not allowing myself to be work with a private equity company to grow my business, not allowing myself, but making all these horrible financial situations with property and all this stuff trying to control situations harm me a great deal. So here's why ego can destroy your legal career. So if you're an attorney, and like I said, and you're successful, you need to bend your desires onto whatever you're seeking to do. And if you want to go in house or in a law firm or be better or do anything in particular, you need to do whatever you can to make that happen. You need to really focus and you need to not be vulnerable. If you want to be a partner, you also need to do that. And you need to bend your will typically to make that happen. And a lot of associates, by the way, they leave law firms because they're afraid of not making partners. I remember a partner once saying to me, I was at a party for the second firm I worked at, and this one associate was talking to a partner, joking around. He said, "No one's ever made partner here because it was a New York office of an LA office of a New York law firm." And the partner said, "That's just because everybody leaves. And so people get afraid and they leave because it hurt their ego." And the most successful attorneys are able to bend their will and control situations. They're able to impose their will on clients to spend more money or to do certain things that the clients wouldn't do normally. They're able to impose their will on everything that they do. They're able to impose their will on other attorneys in the firms they're working in. And I was fired by an attorney once that was working on me. For years, this attorney had been billing me tens of thousands of dollars per month, and I wasn't getting any results. And it was a litigation. And what I realized he was doing is he was just creating tension. He was working me to spend more money, and he was extending the litigation by doing things that were not helping and just making things go on. And I understood what he was doing because I was a litigator and I understood it. But things would happen like the other side would reach out and want to do settlement discussions, and he would reject this without speaking with me, and which I only learned after speaking with the other side in litigation. He would do discovery that would cost $50,000 to respond to. He would do things like do it after the discovery deadline, which created even more work with motions and things. And so I wrote all this down, and talking to the attorney on the other side, which I shouldn't have done, I realized that this whole thing had been manipulated, and this attorney was extending things by not serving my interest. And if you're with a law firm and you're with a big law firm, you may question and see things happening that are really potentially not helping the client, extra work being done, things that, that are serving the firm's self-interest, but maybe not the client's. And I sent copies of a memo that I had written about why I felt this litigation was being extended, and it was. And I don't know why I did this. I was very irresponsible. I was opposing my will on this, but I even sent it to the associates on the case on the other side. And within a few minutes of this memo going out, the attorney fired me and withdrew from the case. So this is a case where you hire good attorneys, and both attorneys are manipulating things, running up bills, and pushing me in one direction by imposing their will on me, not sharing information, and making decisions that weren't in my best interest in finances. And by the way, this is how a lot of very successful attorneys make money and become partners and get huge books of business. Now, I'm not saying that happens with every one of them, but it happens with a lot. And so being unwilling to advise someone to allow me to advise them, I bent my will to get what I wanted. And that created issues. And then I end up finding someone else to take the case. And this also may not have been the best idea. So you need to look at your legal career and everything that you're doing and try to understand how your ego may be controlling your career and how good you're at it. Are you good at imposing your will on others? Are you good at imposing your will, your clients? Are you good at imposing your will on other associates and getting ahead that way? Are you good at imposing your will on cases and matters you're working with? Most of the attorneys, like myself, are trying to achieve something, improve something. The most successful attorneys often have something to prove. Many times they have early career setbacks and they spend their career trying to prove that they're very good at something, or that they want to do what they can to look good in the eyes of other people, like other people that they went to law school, other associates and attorneys that may have seen them fail early in their career. And they want to continually prove something. And they call me up and they tell me all the great things that they're doing. And that's something that's very important to them. And so this ego, you may be in this situation. It makes you buy houses and properties you can't afford. It makes you take jobs you should have, probably won't make you happy, but make you want to look like a specific person, as if you control the world. And you want to show the world that you're successful and have mastered it in your rules. Early in my career, I had this woman whose husband moved to Rochester, New York, for whatever reason, from New York City. And so she had to move with him. And I got her 2 or 3 jobs at the largest firms in Rochester, like Carter Seacrest and some other ones. And then she just didn't do anything with these offers. And I was like, what's going on? And she said, I'm going to look bad to all these people I worked with at Wild Gotchel or whatever the firm was if I go to work at a firm that's not as prestigious as there. So this person literally dropped out of the legal profession because she moved to a smaller market and didn't want to look bad to other people by taking a job at a firm that wasn't as prestigious. And just think about this. And how crazy is that? Like, how crazy is it that someone would stop their legal career because they didn't want to look unsuccessful to other people? And this is something that a lot of people do. They don't take jobs because they don't want to look unsuccessful. They make dumb mistakes because they don't want to look unsuccessful. One of the dumbest things that I ever did, I was maybe 6 or 7 or whatever, 8 years out of college at the University of Chicago, and I received an email from the class secretary that asked me what I was doing. And this email went out to every person in the class to figure out, what have you been doing since you graduated? And today, I certainly would have ignored this email because it doesn't really matter to me to tell people what I'm doing. But back then, I decided to write this long email back telling him about where I'd gone to law school and how well I'd done, the firms I'd worked at, all the offices that opened for my legal recruiting firm, and everything I've done and how many people worked in my company. And I sent him this 3 or 4 page write-up of everything that I'd done, which was insane. And I sent it off and thought nothing of it. And then about a month or so later, Alumni Magazine arrived, and I went to these class notes. They'd taken not everything, but a lot of what I'd written and put it in quotes and then said all this stuff that I'd written. So this long note in the class notes, and I was very impressed with myself that I'd written all this. But as time has gone by, I've realized just how insane I was doing that, and that I needed to prove something to strangers. And my ego was controlling the whole entire situation. And your ego, by the way, is something that probably drives what's happening to your career. You may be doing things to satisfy your ego. I see attorneys all the time turn down jobs where they would be happy with people that are like them, but they go to bigger firms where they become incredibly unhappy, but they're trying to satisfy their ego. And most successful people in the legal profession are trying to use their ego. And they're using their ego to get results. And your ego, though, can create all these issues. A very successful attorney once asked if any law firms I work with are happy and the most successful attorneys and having well-rounded lives. And the most successful attorneys, and this is just something for you to follow in the back of your mind, and no matter where you are now, if you're a law student or attorney, how many years of experience you have, the most successful attorneys, that the biggest firms tend to have large books of business. And in major markets, that's usually at least $5 million in clients, things that they're billing a year. And there's very few attorneys like that that I've ever met that are legitimately happy at work and home and have well-balanced lives. Most of them have been divorced. Most of them have poor relationships with their children. They don't see their children. Their children have problems. So they're doing well professionally. A lot of them have really bad health problems. They often die very early, but they are continually motivated because they're trying to prove something to themselves, the people that they're around. When I told this attorney that, he was very shocked, and he realized that all of this ambition hadn't taken him and really wasn't going to take him to a position where he had happiness and he was happy. And if he was going to keep going in that direction that he was pushing himself, he probably needed to do something different. And a lot of people should be doing something different. If you're unhappy practicing law, you probably should be doing something that just caters to your skills more, where you're happy. A lot of people that become recruiters here, they do this, they start in this profession and they're incredibly happy. They have never been happy in their career, but they're not practicing law anymore. I have a very successful neighbor, or had an extremely successful neighbor that died not too long ago. He was on vacation in the Bahamas, and when his wife found him, he was wearing a CPAC mask, and it was clogged with all around his face. There was cocaine, and he was only 55. And he was someone that had used his ego to become very successful. He was an attorney. He went to Whittier Law School, that's no longer open, not a top ranked law school. And he didn't do well there, but he always had something to prove. And he started a credit card business when he was younger, and he sold it, and then he sold another for a lot of money, like $120 million. And it was a ton of money. He'd been a cocaine addict when he was younger and used this to push himself to work harder and harder. A lot of people in the legal profession like cocaine and things, or meth or other types of stimulants. And he quit cocaine when he was in his mid 30s, and he was sober until he was 50, or I guess drug free. And then he started using this again and started drinking very heavily, which you can do when you're using cocaine. You can just keep going. And he had all these sorts of behaviors that he was doing in earnest. And his first divorce was when he was early 40s. He'd hired a trainer to come to his big house, and he ended up divorcing his wife and marrying her. Every time I would talk to him, he would talk about all the money he made and so forth, his jet, and he would go to Las Vegas, and I went with him before, and he would gamble millions of dollars on the weekend, and addiction, and try to get the best seats in clubs. And I went there with him a few times, and this guy, if you can believe it, was betting $250,000 per hand playing blackjack, and he was sitting there doing this for hours. He would have five hands open at $50,000 each. And then I stayed with him at the Bellagio one time, where he had a suite that was probably at least 7,000 square feet. It had a pool, its own gym, theater, full kitchen. When I went out with him, they were comped like the best seats in clubs, and giving him $5,000 of bottles of champagne, which he didn't need to pay for. And even because I was with him, I got a 3,500 square foot suite. And every year he'd have a big party at this beach house in Malibu. He would have the best caterers. He'd put a DJ on the roof. He would invite rap and basketball stars to his party. I don't even know, he might have paid them to go there. He'd park a giant barge in front of his house on the ocean to release, to let, to do fireworks, all these sorts of things to look successful to other people. Years before he died, he was in New York, and he had a panic attack and had ended up in the hospital for several days. I didn't know what was going on, but when he came back, he bragged to me that he raised all this money. I didn't feel like that was right. It didn't seem like, why would someone need to raise all this money that was betting all this money? Why would he need all this money? And what had happened to him is when he died, he had an account that had, I don't know, 30 or $40 million in it. And what happens when you're betting that much money is the casinos actually put liens on that money. So they had an account of Merrill Lynch. So even though there was like 30 or $40 million in it, they can go in somehow if you fill out paperwork in the casino and they can use that as a credit line. And so when he died, he actually didn't have any money. All that money, every cent that he had pretty much was leaned up by these casinos. And when he was in Vegas, he was treated like a king and made to be very successful. And his ego was stroked. His ego was stroked when I traveled with him, and he was able to feel very successful in life. One of the stupidest things happened when the casino was taking us to this big jet, like after he gambled all this money, is they took myself and his wife and everything to the airport just in a car. The wife wanted to ride with the kids, and but then they put him in the front seat of a Rolls-Royce Phantom so he could be driven to the airport in a Rolls-Royce Phantom instead of taking a car with us, so he would feel a big ego. And I believe this ego is something that kills him. It kills a lot of money people. He was feeding his ego by gambling and trying to look like a big deal. And when he had no money, he couldn't go any further. These private equity firms he was probably using to get money so he had more money to gamble. And attorneys do this kind of thing all the time. They push themselves for so hard for so long, it ends up killing them and creating all sorts of ego issues. So ego makes them strong, but eats them up on the inside and makes life difficult for them. It makes it difficult for them to be happy. I had a candidate once that became a partner at a big New York law firm and was working all these crazy hours. And I would talk to him and from time to time and try to help him, but he didn't want to move for whatever reasons. And then he was in his mid 30s, and one day he flew home to see his family for Christmas or something. He walked in the door and had a heart attack, like within a few minutes of walking in the door, and died, like right in front of his parents he hadn't seen for a long time. And he was someone that wanted to build himself up and try to prove something to others. And so each achievement you get is like a drug, and it will push you forward to try to do better and better again. And so you're always trying to feed your ego. Like, how do you look to other people? What do you do next? What clients do you have? And one of my early mentors was a very successful attorney. And one time he had huge clients that were generating a lot of money for his firm. And he decided to join a much smaller firm, a way smaller firm. And he did that not because he wanted less stress, but because he wanted to control the show and be the most respected for the attorney in the firm he was in. The firm was growing, but at this larger firm, he was slowly losing the power and respect that he'd had when the firm was smaller, before he had the firm he was coming from. And his marriage that he'd been married for 25 years collapsed, and his wife came after him with a very nasty, well-financed campaign. And I will tell you, when you become a successful attorney and you get a lot of business in a law firm, you may have met your wife when you were in law school or younger, or when you were a few years out of law school, and she stops working or he stops working, and then you don't pay any attention to them, and they begin to resent you. You come home, you're stressed, and all these things happen. But this attorney joined this small law firm, and then eventually he went in-house. When he went in-house, he was working at this company that was growing. It wasn't very large, but there's millions of companies that took money. And suddenly he was up against professional managers, and they would question everything he did. And he focused his ego on trying to not take their advice and when they would question him. And he tried to stay there. And eventually he got fired there. And he just kept antagonizing them and making them angry. He was right, they were wrong. And ultimately he got fired and sued him publicly for malpractice, which hurt him. And a lot of times attorneys will go in-house, and when they're in-house, they will try to tell them how to practice law, and they'll get fired, and they will sue the firms. I've seen that happen in a lot of the companies. And one afternoon, I called him, I don't know, it was around 3, and he sounded drunk, and he was working out at an even smaller firm. And I didn't expect him to sound drunk during the workday, but that's what I got. Like this guy that had formerly been a very successful attorney by pushing his will on everything. And the more he pushed his will, literally the more unsuccessful his life became. And he lost his ego at this point, and he'd given up. And I knew that he could get a job, but he wasn't interested, and he was defeated. And because he's older, I doubt that he will ever recover. And this is someone that was at the height of the legal profession and was trying to feed their ego, and it just blew him out of the water. In 2008, I had laid off a lot of people in my business, like several hundred, and I held on to my house and so forth for a few years. But then I had to start selling them off at huge losses, and I couldn't afford things. And I had a former employee of mine write this awful screed about me online, not using his real name. And of course, I spent years figuring out who he was by filing all these lawsuits and so forth. And I spent an entire decade of fighting with him because he had attacked my ego. And I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and so much mind space fighting with someone for attacking me and saying negative things about me that hurt my ego. And I just was very unhappy this whole time. And it was this public spat and lawsuit. And this particular person is now involved in another lawsuit with a former employee. And he attacked his ego, and this person's attacking his ego. And it got to the point with this guy, it's very funny. They're actually making a Netflix documentary about this person and all these lawsuits and things that he's filed against people. And this is all about ego. Like, how do you look to other people? And how do being concerned about that? I should have just taken the attack in stride, but I fought it. And when the financial crisis happened, my ego went on stage, and I was in a stage where I still needed to prove something, and I was buying expensive cars and just dumb things like old Aston Martins and exotic cars. I would buy Porsches and buy like the newest Porsche. So when the model changed, I buy the newest Porsche and waste money and all these things outside myself to make myself unhappy. I was spending too much money trying to show off my cars and impress people. And so let me tell you real quick, and this webinar, we're very close to, I apologize, it's gone a little bit longer, but why do the most successful attorneys, why are they powered by their ego? And what happens when it goes too far? So many of the attorneys I work with, a high number of them, wants to be more and more successful, and they're trying to prove something. These are often the most marketable attorneys, and they want more business, or they want to get into better law firms, or they want to work on larger clients, or they want to have the opportunity to do more work, or these are the type of people that are the most marketable. When you talk to these people, I'm sure you know some of them, they will tell you about everything they're doing. They will compare neighborhoods, they will compare reviews, they will compare hours, and they will tell you all the positive things that other people have said about them, not how they feel, but they're going to tell you all the positive things that other people have said about them. My children will spend their days on social media pages watching what their friends are doing and feeling envious, and then trying to get more followers than other people are doing. And then if they're in a disagreement with someone posting something bad about that person on their social media site, and then everyone gets crushed. And another one of my daughter's friends is friends with a celebrity and has picked up 25,000 followers. And so even children, your children, and maybe you are trying to feed your ego on social media. You want to be seen as desirable and powerful and popular. And then if you have a lack of followers, then that makes you feel badly about yourself. And so when you're trying to control everything and you're trying to use your ego, you're motivated regardless of the consequences. So think about the things that you've done based on your ego in your career and your life because of your ego. And all attorneys have egos. What are the consequences been of that? And are you worried about giving up because you feel like, you failed because you're not at a certain situation in your career that you would want to be at? That's very common. A lot of attorneys feel like they failed. And to maintain their egos, they may hide, they may not expose themselves to people, places, and things that challenge their self-worth. Even now, I don't enjoy reading about people who made $1 billion doing something because it doesn't make me feel good about myself. So I will avoid that often. And some people will withdraw from the world because they don't want to be seen in a certain way. And they'll put themselves in situations where their egos are fed, not necessarily ones that will not feed their egos. Now, I spoke with an attorney not too long ago that is very successful. He wants to be even more successful. And I pointed out to him that if he wants to be very much seen in the market, he should be trying to talk to the media and get himself out there. And regardless of, who the attorney is, they often want to be seen in the market and that by others, and that drives their success. People love it when they're in the news or when other people see how well they're doing. It makes them feel very good about themselves. And this attorney told me he never talks to the media. And he was more comfortable writing law review articles and things like that because he felt like if he was in the media, unlike other attorneys that are in the media, he felt like they might say something bad about them. So he's only exposing them to sell people that will say good things about him. Many attorneys go into large law firms that are incredibly demanding or feel bad because they're not there. And they have very strong academic backgrounds and experienced like an entire lifetime of success in school and been in situations where they've done well. Think about if you go to a law school, you probably were a good student to some extent or a great extent in college and getting positive feedback. You get to law school, you may continue that or may not, and that will hurt your ego. And people like I was in law school and people that weren't doing well and getting jobs became incredibly depressed because they weren't in a situation that was feeding their ego. Oftentimes I see it's very common. Sometimes attorneys will get into law firms that are way above their skill set. And instead of moving firms, they will do things like think they need to become an entertainment agent, all these things, instead of exposing themselves to firms that might feed their ego a little more. But it's hard to advance when you're surrounded by so many successful people many times. And if your ego isn't supported, you will often drop out of the practice of law, which is insane. Anybody, I don't care who you are, if you pass the bar exam, you can be an extremely successful attorney if you apply yourself in the right way. It doesn't mean you need to quit if you're not getting positive feedback. It means you need to be probably in a different legal environment, doing something else, and you can. Some of the most successful attorneys I know got out of law school, and no one would hire them. They didn't know what to do, so they started their own practices doing immigration or bankruptcy or consumer bankruptcy or personal injury and became unbelievably successful and unbelievably happy oftentimes compared to what they would be if they were in different types of law firms. But that's things aren't feeding your ego. You may quit. You may go in house. You may do all these things will be decisions that you may be basing on your ego that aren't necessarily going to keep you practicing law. You may be someone right now that's very bitter. You're bitter at the profession. You feel unfulfilled. You feel that people aren't saying good things about you, that you're getting a lot of criticism. And frankly, criticism is just something that can help you grow. It doesn't need to be like a hit to your ego. When I was very young, my first summer job, my first year, I couldn't believe I didn't want to have anybody critiquing my work because it hurt my ego. So I would avoid them. And I would take on these assignments where I felt no one would question me. And I didn't take that, I did later, but it's like you should take those things as like rocket fuel. Instead of getting defeated and upset, you should take any type of criticism you have as something that pushes you to do better and better if you can. And a lot of very ambitious attorneys will do whatever it takes to support their ego. They will bill more hours than other people by just massive hours that maybe they don't need to, but they need to prove something by billing 3,000 hours instead of 2,000 hours like everybody's doing because they want to get more praise. And I see attorneys like that all the time. They're very proud. They've worked 3,000 hours, got the largest bonus in their firm, but they don't think about like the cost of that. And they prioritize their careers because they want to look better than others. They will prioritize their health, their romantic lives, their personal lives, all these things because they're trying to feed their ego. And I will tell you that if you truly prioritize this stuff in a law firm, for example, and you make it your everything, you can be very successful. But you also need to have perspective that if you're feeding your ego, there's a huge cost. And because you may not have a family, you may not have children that are happy, you may die, and all these sorts of things happen. And I've seen it. Like most very successful attorneys, the biggest firms have been divorced, some 4 or 5 times. They have children that have problems. They have alcohol problems and all these different things. And if you make your career everything, you can certainly do that. But if you're comparing yourself to other people and you're allowing yourself to your whole career to function based on this whole thing of like, how do you look to yourself in terms of your level of success? How do you look to others in terms of your level of success? This advice is very important because if you stop feeding your ego and you just start maybe enjoying your job and doing the best you can and putting your head down and not worrying about all these other things that are happening, and take your ego out, it can have huge rewards. A lot of times, what will happen in law firms is certain associates may be criticized for their work, and then they will find other associates to commiserate with because their egos have been hurt, and then they'll leave firms and they don't have to. When you take your ego out of a situation and you stop thinking like you need to look good to others and you just do what you do, you can be much happier. You don't need to be controlled completely by your ego. And law firm partners, it's a complete ego fight in most firms. They're fighting over who was the first person to make contact with a client. And if they bring in the business, it may go to another partner that knew the client before. They'll fight over compensation. Compensation fights are huge in law firms, and attorneys will move firms and do all these things because they're not making as much money as other people, and they feel they should. Their ego's completely involved, and they make these reckless career moves going to places just for compensation that ends up hurting them in the long run. And their ego just controls their entire career, and they're under stress. They're trying to make the most money, this partners, and look the best for their career. And they try to impose their will on clients. They try to impose their will on associates. They try to impose their ego on all these different people to feed their ego and to look successful. A lot of partners will judge themselves based on never having lost a case, even though they may have settled every case. And so that becomes something that feeds your ego. And when a lot of times, what'll happen, like I said earlier, and this may have happened to you, you may have left a law firm and gone into a different practice setting because it wasn't making you feel good about yourself. You may have done all these things. Maybe you stopped practicing law. Maybe you took a job doing something else where you felt your ego was going to be stroked. And so people to do that, will often go try to do things that are going to allow them to feel important, or they'll just give up, which is very common. Your ego can help you, but it can also just profoundly do damage to you. And this is something to realize. It's very important because most attorneys, like I said at the beginning of this presentation, and to a great extent, are motivated by their egos and positive reinforcement, clients, other partners, and associates. And when I read and study, and because I talk to so many attorneys, I talk to multiple attorneys a day, and I learn about other attorneys and these attorneys. But when I study all these attorneys, I know attorneys that have several that have gone to prison, if you can believe it. The first firm I was at, I knew 3 attorneys that went to prison. One, because he left the practice of law and he started this business and he wanted to make all this money and he lied and ripped off all these people and went to prison. Another person that wasn't practicing law and threw his wife off a cruise ship because he wanted insurance money. All these problems. And so people were concerned about how they looked to others, and they based their lives and their success on their egos. So they committed crimes. They died. I know one attorney that was at the first firm I was at. He always billed the most hours and did as well as he could. And one day he just, again, had a heart attack and died. I know other attorneys that have gotten cancer they probably should have. And people that give up because they're not getting the right feedback. But trying to feed your ego by doing the best, trying to not getting out of the practice of law because it's not feeding your ego where you're at. And you can be much more successful, often, and happy when you're contributing to the world in the way you want, working in a way that's making you happy and connecting with others instead of allowing your ego often to separate you others. People don't like people that are trying to brag about everything they do. It doesn't make other people feel good about themselves. It doesn't invite any other sort of connection other than competing with other people. And it's just not something that you need to do. You need to be aware of like how your ego has controlled your career and how it's controlled your life. And anybody that's on this webinar right now, I'm telling you that the odds are very good that your ego is controlling a lot of what you're doing. It's controlling your success, it's controlling your failures, and just understanding that to the extent you can take it out of your life, it's going to have great awards. I believe that the people that end up being the most successful in terms of their happiness will try to just put their heads down and do the best they can. They're not going to constantly compare themselves to others because that's going to make them unhappy. I mean, you need to do the best you can, but if you do the best you can, you're without feeling like you need to prove something to others, you're often going to do the best you can. You're often going to do well. You can be in relationships that work. You can make social connections with people that like you for who you are. You can do hobbies and things that you like. You don't have to drive a nice car. You don't have to live in a big city. You don't have to do all these things that stroke your ego and make you feel good to others. And literally, the most successful attorneys are the ones that don't involve themselves in drama and fighting with other people and get their ego. They just do really good work, and success comes. And it comes because they're not taking up all this mind space with their ego. If you have your ego controlling your mind space, you're always doing what you can to look the best to others, and you're just doing the best you can. You're not taking sides in issues. You're not getting offended when your work is criticized. You're just going to do better. You're not going to feel badly necessarily about the firm you're in. You're going to make things happen there and then maybe move to a better firm when you get the skills, but you're not going to feel badly about yourself all the time. You're not going to feel badly about where you went to law school. Who cares? You're not going to feel badly about how you did in law school. You're not going to feel badly because someone fired you and didn't like you. Maybe you're just in the wrong atmosphere, working with the wrong people. You're just going to continue forward. You're not going to overbill your clients to make as much money as possible. You're going to really try to serve them. And you're not going to have to abuse substances to cover up how you feel about yourself and delude yourself into thinking like you need to be a certain type of person to be happy. And you're not going to be dependent on what others say to make you happy. And you're not going to be afraid to be vulnerable with your significant others or with your friends, and you're going to have better relationships. And you can still be motivated and do all these things, but the more you think about what you're doing, is it motivated by your ego or is it motivated for you to be happy? And can you be motivated without constant approval? And can you be motivated not working at the best firm or in the best job or in the best practice areas? And you need to prioritize how things make you feel, not how they look to others. And if you remove yourself from the equation in terms of your ego and concentrate and do the best you can, and that feels right, it's going to make you and other people happy. Oftentimes, like the most successful attorneys in terms of generating business, they will just be able to connect with people and people will like them and they can express a little bit of vulnerability and not involve their ego in everything. And too many people, probably you, certainly me, often rely on your ego. And if you base your life and your career on what other people think, you're going to be probably have issues. You're going to withdraw or get very upset or offended and you don't get the right feedback. And then you're going to continually be pushing your entire career to get more and more approval. All right, so we'll go to questions. Okay, I've realized I often tell myself that I'm not the right fit for certain firms before I even apply, even though I meet all the criteria. How can attorneys get past these subconscious barriers to keep them pursuing the best role? Okay, so there's a couple of things about when people aren't applying to firms. The first thing is, even though you may have some opinions about a firm, you read Glassdoor or top law schools or whatever, BCG also has firm reviews. You read reviews about a firm, you decide that the firm's not a place you want to work. Or you look at the attorneys working there and you decide that they're not up to your caliber. Or you look at the work they're doing, decide it's not up to your caliber. One of the things that's important is that, first of all, every firm has different practice areas. And so the work you get and the type of work you get is going to be different in each practice areas. Different firms, even though you may not realize it, have different levels of compensation. I was working with an attorney a couple of weeks ago, and he was making like $130,000 at a firm in Texas. He was getting this offer from this firm in Sacramento. It was a small firm of like maybe 8 people. So I called the law firm to discuss his compensation. And when he was applying to this firm, they didn't even have an opening. But I thought there could be a good fit for him because they did the type of litigation he did, which is pretty general commercial litigation. And they said, I was like, how much are you going to pay him? I thought they were going to come in at like $150,000 or 30 or whatever. And they paid him 400,000, which I was just amazed at. And he never would have gotten that job had he not allowed me to send him to that firm. I had another time I had a woman that was actually working for me. I have a website called JD Journal, and she had been an attorney, I think at Skadden before, and she was working for my JD Journal site, doing editing and writing articles and supervising writers or something. She was making maybe $25 an hour. And I found out that she'd worked for Skadden 3 years ago. And she told me she'd had this horrible experience and had moved to someplace in Texas to be with her sister and was living in her house and had this horrible experience where she stayed up for, I don't know, 3 or 4 days and had one of her eyes exploded or something, the blood vessel. And so she had shied away from practicing law. And so I started marketing her to some firms in California, and she got an interview with this firm that was very small, about six attorneys, and led by this attorney that had all this business. And she went to interview there, and they had these like wooden desks. It was not wooden desk, run down desk, and the office wasn't nice and everything. So she left the interview and she was like, I don't even think these people can afford to pay me like what I would need as an attorney, which frankly wasn't very much. It was like maybe $100,000 a year. And I talked to the attorney after she interviewed there, and I was like, she's a little concerned because it looks like a pretty rundown office and everything. And he said, no, this isn't the case at all. She would be billing out here at $500 an hour, and I have plenty of work to keep her busy. And the way I pay my attorneys is they keep half of the collection, meaning if she billed 2,000 hours at this firm, she would make $500,000 a year. So she took the job and couldn't believe it. But this sort of stuff happens all the time. So you may take a look at a firm and think it's not good enough for you, or there's something wrong with it, but it's all going to be dependent on the practice area you're with. And you could go to work at the biggest firms in the world, like the ones that seem the most competitive, and get a job with one partner that you'd be doing all your work for, who's very nice and would mentor you and help you get business. You just don't know. So anybody should be applying to as many firms as you possibly can, because every firm has different practice areas. Every firm has different compensation models. Every firm has different opportunities. I had a woman recently that was a trust and estates attorney, and there was this firm, where this guy had like this lot of business. He was making over a big book of business. He was making like $1 million a year servicing trust and estates clients. And she was in California and hadn't even gone to an accredited law school, like, meaning there are law schools in California where the only state you can basically work in is California if you take the bar. So these are not good law schools. They're like online, and they have 90% bar failure rates and all these things. But anyway, she got into one of these law schools, and she was a trust and estates attorney working an hourly role, but getting paid pretty well, like $75 an hour. And so she got this offer from this guy, and who basically wanted to retire in 5 years, and was going to hand over his book of business and wanted to like groom her for this. So he got this offer from this guy, and she decided that she was going to make more money making $75 an hour and getting more remote flexibility than taking over this guy's business and having this huge opportunity, which was dumb. But there are things like that all the time. So you should never not apply to certain firms because you have a lot of preconceptions. Now, there are instances where the firm may not do your practice area. There are instances where the firm, there's just things wrong with it that you don't think are overcomable. But my advice to everyone is to apply to as many places as possible within reason, because every firm's going to have different opportunities, and every firm is going to have different types of people that you can work for. And I see things happen all of the time where people get these jobs that I'm just amazed by, and they only get them because they open themselves to applying, but to a lot of places. And not everybody does that. It's very important that you market yourself and apply to as many people as possible. And frankly, most people don't buy into this. The guy that got the job in Sacramento allowed me to market him to a lot of firms. Had he not done that, he would still be making $130,000 and not $400,000 a year. All sorts of things happen when you're able to open yourself up to applying to a lot of firms you wouldn't expect. Sometimes you'll just find a firm that completely matches where the people are just like you, and you wouldn't know until you get in there, or where you're extremely comfortable with the culture and everything clicks. And that helps you as well. I've noticed that some of my peers who are more self-promoting seem to land better positions faster, even if their work isn't objectively stronger. What are the practical, ethical ways I can elevate my own visibility without feeling like I'm bragging or misrepresenting myself? You should be bragging. You should look strong in your resume. You should put your best foot forward. You should do everything you can to make yourself look as good as you possibly can. And this is what, think about it, like the people that are the best at promoting themselves are also the best at promoting their clients' best interests. So people often don't look at their resumes in a way that makes them look strong. They put things on there that will not make them look strong. They'll put their political affiliation when maybe they're half the country is one political affiliation or another, or they will talk poorly about their experience. They won't put everything that they did. But yeah, you have to be very self-promoting in a resume. It's like one of the most important things you can do. And you certainly don't want to lie, but you want to make yourself look very strong. You want to de-emphasize your weaknesses and you want to make it look like you're strong. You don't want to be in a position where you're not looking like the best, person possible. You want to de-emphasize your weaknesses and elevate and promote your strengths. One of the most positive things you can do in your resume, by the way, is say you're an attorney that does primarily mergers and acquisitions work, but you also do some IP and you also do a little bit of litigation, and you're applying for mergers and acquisitions jobs. You don't want to talk about all these other things. You want to just talk about the one practice area you're doing. That makes you look stronger. If you had previous jobs where you've done another practice area, you just say you were an associate or whatever. You want to look as strong as possible. And attorneys that are self-promoting are the ones that are often going to be the most successful because they can do the same thing with their clients. They can promote their clients' interests. And that's your job as an attorney, is to be an advocate. And the most important thing you can do is be an advocate for yourself. You're your own client when you're looking for a job. You have to be able to promote yourself. You have to be able to go into interviews and say, I really want this job. This is what's good about me. I'm loyal. I'm the kind of person that likes to commit. I'm that. And those are the people that get jobs, not the people that don't promote themselves. You have to promote yourselves. Now, there are exceptions to that. If you're interviewing with associates and you're an associate, you don't want to alienate other associates and make them think that you're going to be this horrible competitor that's going to make them look bad. But if you're interviewing partners, yeah, you need to appear as gung ho as possible because they want to channel that motivation and that experience into you doing good work for their clients. So you have to look strong. That's your job. Your job in a job search is to look like the best attorney possible, not to de-emphasize your skills. And it's just not what it is. Okay, let me just see. There's a lot of people in chat. Maybe people are able to chat. This looks like people are just having fun here, which is okay. Let me see. With a lot of questions that are nonsense, but it's okay. I'm glad people are having fun. Okay, you talked about attorneys missing out because they don't put themselves in front of other people. Enough people have relied on recruiters most of my career moves and rarely send applications out on my own. Is that too passive a strategy in today's market? If I want to take more control, what specific steps should I take to build momentum in my job search, especially if I'm moving for lateral partner moves? Yeah, so a lot of times, one of the benefits of recruiters is you don't have to receive rejection letters. You don't have to, the recruiter basically will control all that, and all the negative input will come to the recruiter. But the benefits of recruiters are able to take good ones, are able to take your experience and what they get from talking to you, and they're able to frame that as something very strong, as something that appeals to firms and says the right things to firms that you couldn't say on your own. And if you're a partner of a business, law firms are comfortable dealing with recruiters because it's in their best interest to, they have a job, and if they hire you, they're going to make a lot of money. And the recruiter is not going to charge them a lot of money. It's usually like about 1 to 2 weeks of your salaries where it comes out. So of your annual salary once. And those, they're guarantees and things. But if you are a partner, many times recruiters are only comfortable working with a few firms that they may have very strong relationships with and not other firms when the market is very large. So if you're working with a recruiter and there's other firms in the market that you'd like to approach, and the recruiter is unable to do that, then sure, there's no reason to not send applications on your own. You need to look after your own self-interest. And so your self-interest is getting in front of as many people as you possibly can to get the best offer you possibly can, to find the best environment for yourself that you possibly can. Okay, let's see here. I left the firm 2 years ago after clashing with leadership, and I suspect there may be lingering negative sentiment that's affecting my candidacy elsewhere. What practical steps can I take to repair? Let me see. What practical steps can repair, counteract that kind of reputational damage during a job search without sounding like I'm making excuses or rehashing drama? I don't think that most law firms in general, law firms will not say bad things about previous people that have worked there. There's nothing wrong with having problems or relation at a firm. Most of the time, most attorneys have been fired at least one time in their career, sometimes many times. So I don't think you need to worry about reputational damage. I think that you may just say, you can say it wasn't a good fit. You can say they didn't have enough work. You can say I was wanting to get into a different. There's all sorts of things you can say, but you don't want to ever bring up anything negative that happened at a prior employer, because that's showing weakness, and law firms typically will not respect that. And a lot of times when people clash with leadership early in their career, that becomes a pattern. They continue doing it. So I would just learn whatever lessons you can from that and just learn not to make those mistakes in the future. As attorneys get older, they often become much more savvy in terms of politics and avoiding issues. The biggest thing you can do is not talk about it in your job search, deflect the question to something that doesn't sound bad. Most of the time, when attorneys are interviewing other attorneys that aren't employed or whatever, they know that something bad may have happened, but they're still interviewing you because they have work for you and they need someone. And so they will typically not often bring that stuff up when you're interviewing. So every attorney's had problems in different employers, but just remember that employers are businesses or law firms are businesses, and they're going to hire people that think can make them money. And just because you've had problems at one point in your career doesn't mean that's going to harm you permanently. And it also, you should keep in mind that most of the people interviewing you probably have had problems statistically at an employer before too. So there's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't allow that to define you for the rest of your career. Okay. I received a performance review last year that I brushed off at the time, but now I wonder if I should revisit with more humility. How do I approach past feedback constructively without appearing reactive or insecure when I'm networking or interviewing with at new firms? So everyone, especially young attorneys, will receive bad performance reviews. It's the way they make them improve. So anytime you get a bad performance review, you need to take it very seriously and improve in response to it. Doesn't mean you have to leave unless the firm indicates you should. Attorneys will get bad performance reviews because the law firms may not have a lot of work and they want you to leave. There's all sorts of, or you may get too senior and they may not have enough work for you. Then there's all sorts of reasons you'd be getting bad performance reviews, or you may have upset someone and done something wrong. All these things can happen. You don't need to really worry about that. It's to the extent that it's going to define your whole career. You just need to learn from it. And the only way attorneys learn is often you don't learn how to be an attorney in law school. You just learn all the subjects. You learn how to be an attorney when you start getting feedback and you start getting into a law firm. When you're interviewing with new firms, you never want to talk about the fact that you got negative feedback. You can talk, you learned a lot, and some of the things you learned about different types of whatever practice area you're in. But you never want to bring up negative performance reviews in interviews. Why would you do that? Because the law firm is a business and they want to hire the best people they can. And if they're interviewing one person that talks about all their weaknesses and things they did wrong, and they're interviewing one who doesn't, they're always going to prefer the person that doesn't. And so when you're an attorney, you're your own client. So as your own client, your job is to promote yourself and do it. If you were representing a murderer in court, you certainly wouldn't talk about why this person's negative. You would talk about why they didn't do it, and you would brush off the evidence, and you would promote the positive view of the person to the jury. So you're doing the same thing when you're representing yourself in a job search. You need to be able to come across as someone who's very, very strong and not someone that isn't. And that's what I guess one of the best pieces of advice I can tell you on that. But yeah, everyone should never bring up negative things or negative feedback in interviews. Why would you? Because they're going to interview someone that won't do that. And if you were an employer, you would do the same thing. So imagine you're interviewing someone to paint your house or paint the inside of your house. And one person comes in and interviews for the job, and they say, I've done these jobs. I did a couple of them wrong. I messed things up. I put the wrong color on someone's wall, and I had to go back and fix something that I did because the paint was peeling. You interviewed another person. They said, I've never had any problems with my clients. I do really good work. I do it on time. I do it without drama. That's the person you would hire. So it's not the same thing you're interviewing with a firm, but it's very similar because firms are going to hire the person that comes across as the most confident. You would do the same thing if you're hiring someone to paint your house. And so this is what you need to do in order to advance in your career. Okay, next question. Okay, I've turned down several job offers in the past because I thought they were beneath me in terms of prestige, but now I'm questioning whether I was letting my ego dictate my choices. How do I determine whether my current job search is generally in line with my long-term goals versus being ego-driven? So the way you do that is you don't necessarily turn down offers just because you can turn down offers because they were beneath you in prestige. There's nothing wrong with that. To be a successful attorney, you probably want to make sure that you're working at better and better firms if you can. That's what law firm attorneys do. So it doesn't mean you need to turn down job offers. A better firm you get into, the larger clients you'll be working on. The larger clients you're working on, the more in depth you'll be able to work, the higher quality of work's required. The largest companies have general counsels and things that are reviewing works. The work that comes out needs to be perfect. So there's nothing wrong with turning down job offers. There is if you're unemployed. If you're unemployed, then you need to go to a place that hires you. There's nothing wrong with turning down a job offer in that situation. But in terms of turning down job offers, if you're employed and you really want to advance to a better place and you have reasons for doing that, there's nothing wrong with that. And you should be trying to get into better firms if you can handle it. There's nothing that's exactly what you should be doing. And a lot of attorneys will turn down job offers, sometimes multiple job offers, because they get into the firm and they realize that the work isn't what they want to do, or it's not as sophisticated or whatever. Your ego should dictate your choices, but certainly not completely. Let's see here, next question. Okay, someone's having a lot of fun here. This funny question: would you support a rule that no one could become an attorney unless they had at least 20 jury trials? Let me just see here. Okay, here's a good question. If anybody has any more questions, now's the time to ask them, because I think this is the last question. I've had my own practice in Pennsylvania for the last 10 years, but I just got married to a federal employee. My wife earns more than me, and I'm wondering if it's feasible to move to another state. Any tips? Yeah, I don't know why you would want to move to another state if you have your own practice, and that often is the case. You can actually do very well working for the federal government. Now, there's not a lot of security in that right now, but it doesn't mean you need to move to another state. And you can, if you want, you could probably get a job for the government in Pennsylvania. There's plenty of government jobs, both the state and the federal level, that a lot of people don't think of when they're doing job searches. There's a website, I think, called USA Jobs that has all the federal jobs there. So there's lots of opportunities to work in the government if that's what you want to do. And if you have your own practice, one of the things that's nice to be able to do is to try to take courses and things. For every practice area, there's often courses and things and groups online that teach people how to increase their business. If they're not those type of courses, there's often things you can take for solo practitioners. There's plenty of those things that can help you increase your business. It's certainly something that you can improve your practice here and how you're doing there, or you could always go to the federal government or state government or wherever. Let me make sure I got all the questions here. People are having a lot of fun here today. Okay, thank you for all your questions. I will be back, of course, next week. I think this hopefully was a useful webinar for you to understand the problems that a lot of people have that control their careers, and then how to counteract that. So thanks again, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your week. Thank you.